In this screencast, we walk through the create action in the movies controller, which is triggered when we try to add a new movie to our database. And as a nice bonus, we get a look at the Rails and Ruby debugger and how we can use it to help debug our SaaS apps. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start the application with the -- debugger option. That tells Rails that we might be putting in some interactive debug breakpoints and snooping around while the app is running. And while the app is starting up, inside the create action in our controller, I'm going to insert the statement debugger, which actually sets a debug breakpoint. So let's save that file. We're going to start Rotten Potatoes up. As always, we can start from the listing of all movies. And now we're going to go to the Add New Movie screen, and we're going to enter a fictitious movie that was released on January 14th, 2012. And now, let's just have the terminal window ready here. When we hit Save Changes, we're in the debugger, RDB. As a reminder, what happened was that this form was submitted to the create action, but the very first line in the create action is to drop into the debugger. So here we are, and we can take a look around a little bit. One thing to take a look at is params, which is the hash that Rails prepares for us with all of the parameters in the fill-in form. So P is a shorthand for print something in the debugger. Here's the params hash, and one thing to notice is that it contains a nested hash, params movie. Specifically, if I print out the nested hash, these are the attributes that I had just filled in on this fill-in form. Now, you might have noticed that I can refer to params : movie equally successfully. Remember, this is not because strings and symbols are interchangeable. It's because params is actually a special kind of construct that quacks like a hash, but doesn't care whether you pass it a symbol or a string. It's actually written so that at your convenience you can do either one. So it's just something to keep in mind. What else can we do in the debugger? Well, we can notice that the date fields are a little bit weird. Now, we saw in the previous screencast that the date menu is actually 3 separate pop-ups, and here's the result of those date menus. There's the year, the month, and the day, and we said that Rails will actually put those things back together automatically if we try to use this as an active record attribute. So we could test that hypothesis. We can actually just type some Ruby code right at the command line as if we were in Rails console or in the IRB debugger, and we could say my movie equals movie new, and we're just going to pass it this parameter hash. And sure enough, it was smart enough to put all the date fields back together. So we got a little look at what was in the params hash. We could actually type some code. All of the variables that are in scope at this point we could take a look at by saying p variable name. So now, what else can we do? Well, let's single step the debugger. We're going to use n for next, and that's going to execute this next line, which is going to actually try to create the movie in the database. Okay, well, that seemed to go well. And if we print at movie, the instance variable that was just created, sure enough, it looks like a movie was created. And notice that unlike before, when we just did movie new, right? Remember that new doesn't actually save anything in the database, but create does. So the created movie actually has an ID, and it has all of the correct attributes that we expect it to have. Well, we've finished our look around. Let's go ahead and continue. In other words, tell Rails that it's fine to get out of the debugger and continue where we left off. That will be the C command. So that will assign something to the flash, and then it's going to fall out of the create controller method. And what happens when we do that? By the way, notice that the web browser has been patiently waiting this entire time for a response. So let's get that response. And we got an error. Shouldn't be too surprising, because as you remember from before, at the end of a controller method, Rails will try to find an action view template to render. In this case, we have the create action, but Rails is complaining that there's no template with that name that it can render. In the next section of the book, we'll see how to resolve that. But in this screencast, we set a debug breakpoint. We used the opportunity to look around at different variables. We single-stepped, we continued, and we finally continued on our way and allowed the method to complete.